It's another Football Friday in Oklahoma. I'm Mike Sherman, sports editor of the Oklahoman, and joining me to talk about the big games this weekend are members of our OU and OSU coverage teams from somewhere in Rocky Top land, OU beat writer Jason Kersey, from just over the way, right here in the Oklahoman newsroom, 100 West Main, Suite 100 in Oklahoma City, our OSU beat writer Kyle Fredrickson, and from her home in Oklahoma City, columnist Jenny Carlson. Football Fridays, of course, are brought to you from the studio of the Oklahoman, right here, front and center on Main Street, where you can stop by and say hi. Let's start with OSU and Central Arkansas. Jenny, Kyle, you guys are covering that game, and it's not a competitive game. It's more known for anticipation. The most anticipated thing, of course, Jenny, is the home debut of Mason Rudolph. I had this question at the bottom of my email, Jenny, but I'll move it right up to the top. Can you think of an OSU player who was more anticipated before he had ever played a home game than Mason Rudolph?
Well, I mean, I think that we definitely know more about Mason Rudolph than probably anybody that's, waited this long to make their home debut. Just a weird, quirky, schedule essentially set this up where, he starts on the road, makes his first start at Baylor, then goes to OU, then it's the Bowl, then they open on the road. So literally a guy who's been the starter of this team for 10 months has not ever played a home game. It's just really odd. So, I think people are excited to finally see Mason Rudolph in person. And, I think there probably have been guys before that have been more anticipated. Back in the day, Josh Fields, I believe he made sort of his biggest appearance before he started at Baylor. And then he goes to OU and leads that win. So he was a guy that kind of rode in late in that season, and before he made a home debut, he had played some games for the Cowboys, and I think people were pretty fired up about him. I think there's been a few, but this is obviously a weird deal, just the way the schedule played out. And I guess Kyle I think you wrote about this earlier in the week, the fact that it goes back even further because Mason Rudolph hadn't played a home game for quite a while back in even high school.
Yeah, we're talking more than 600 days in between home starts. Now, it's not necessarily Dax Garman's big break and play and how significant that was last year. But for a guy, who's had so much success on the road in his career at this point, it probably sets up pretty well for him, the fact that he's been through some of these tougher environments. Now he gets to come back home where he's got an army of orange behind him.
Kyle, the Cowboys game against Central Arkansas, just from a competitive standpoint, there's not even a line out on it.
Right.
This is not a game that anybody expects to be competitive. What is the meaning of it? What is what stands to be revealed Saturday in Stillwater?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for a lot of these OSU fans to kind of take their finger off of the panic button on this offense. Clearly, against Central Michigan, it was an underwhelming performance. I mean, I just went back and looked at some of our predictions for the score. I had OSU scoring 35 points. I think the rest of our coverage team had them scoring at least 40.
Ouch.
So when they come out in a performance like they did and beating them by a much slimmer margin than a lot of fans expected, I think there were a bit of those flashbacks to last season, to that 5-game losing streak, to how conservative the play calling became under offensive coordinator Mike Yurcich. And with all the weapons that the Cowboys have this year, I think a lot of fans, and rightfully so, looked at that performance and thought, what's going on? I thought this was the year with Mason Rudolph returning and Chris Carson and all these wide receivers that OSU was going to kind of return to the glory days back to, 2011, 2012, when they were ranked within the top 5 offenses in the nation. Are we going to find out if OSU is that caliber on Saturday? No, not at all. We're talking about a Central Arkansas team that got a defense that got ran up by 45 points and more than 530 yards last week against another FCS opponent. So it's not the standard of what the Cowboys are going to face, but at the very least, this should be an opportunity to see this offense open up, to really see that scoreboard light up, up into the 40 or 50-point range. This offense should be capable of doing against a lower opponent. So if the fans can see a little bit of those strides, it takes a little bit of the heat off of Mike Yurcich. It gives everyone a little bit more comfort just in what this scheme is going to look like because they certainly didn't get that after week 1.
Jenny, Kyle twice referenced offensive coordinator Mike Yurcich, the guy who followed Dana Holgorsen. He's followed a pretty good run of offensive coordinators at OSU. How would you characterize OSU fans' relationship with him?
I don't know that they have a real good relationship with Mike Yurcich. It's interesting. He comes in his first year in the middle of that three-way quarterback battle between Wes Lunt, J.W. Walsh, and Clint Shelf, if memory serves me right. If it wasn't them, it was another quarterback battle, and he basically, from all accounts, got the verbal kibosh put on and told not to say anything, not to reveal anything. And so the guy who, had come from Shippensburg, and, there was YouTube video out there of him, showing plays with Lego characters, a guy that seemingly, was a pretty fun character, kind of went into a shell. And, then last year, obviously, the struggles that they had, I think it just continued because there was really not a lot that he could do offensively. He couldn't be creative, really in the least. They just didn't have the weapons. And so I think that you just kind of saw him, sort of, go within himself. I don't know what Kyle would say to this, but my feeling is that we've started to see a lot more of the actual Mike Yurcich, both as a play caller to some extent in that Central Michigan game, and also as a person. I just think he's been way more relaxed this preseason and early season. Obviously, they went to Central Michigan and just said, you know what, we're going to be super conservative. When he did open the playbook after Central Michigan took that lead, you got to see the way the offense is really supposed to look or really going to look when games are up in the air, when Big 12 conference play heads towards them. So I think we're starting to see a little bit more of the actual Mike Yurcich, and I think as that happens, I think OSU fans are actually going to like this guy. But obviously, everywhere, offensive coordinator is the first guy who should be fired as soon as any problem starts to happen. So Mike Yurcich. It was Josh Heupel at OU. At some point, it will be Lincoln Riley at OU. I mean, they all face this. That's just the nature of fans. So I'm sure he'll still face that. But I think we're going to – now, I think this game against Central Arkansas, if they were conservative at Central Michigan, there's no reason to believe that they're going to pull off the wraps and, throw everything out there against Central Arkansas. I have a feeling it's going to be a very vanilla game plan, lots of Chris Carson, Rennie Childs, a little bit of passing game here and there, but largely they'll go vanilla again and just overpower Central Arkansas. So don't expect to see a lot of, at least from where I'm sitting, I don't think we're going to see a lot of, deep, fireworks or anything like that. But I think they will score a ton of points on Central Arkansas. And as we point towards that Big 12 opener for OSU against Texas, I think that's really the game where we could see them pull back some of the wraps off this offense and really let it fly.
Kyle, Jenny referenced the idea that the offensive coordinator is always the sort of fall guy for when things are going badly, but that hasn't really been the case at Oklahoma State to this point. In fact, during Gundy's era, being offensive coordinator there was you're ticketed for great things somewhere else. Of course, Fedora, Todd Monken, Dana Holgorsen. This is really the first time, and Mike Gundy himself, this is really the first, who would never fire himself, of course. This is really the first time the offensive coordinator at OSU has come under great fire. Is there something that could happen on Saturday that could start to change that impression for Mike Yurcich?
Yeah, baby steps. Like Jenny said, this isn't necessarily going to be a game where the Cowboys are going to have to really open things up. But, this is another chance for OSU to see what this offense is made of. And even if they're going to be conservative with a lot of Yurcich's play calls, a lot of the guys that Yurcich recruited are out there. You got his quarterback and Mason Rudolph. He played a bit of a role in getting Chris Carson here. A lot of these young wide receivers, these are guys that he found fit for the system he wanted to run, and now they are all together playing on the same page. So this game, this season, I think all of it is going to be a big reflection on the type of job that Mike Yurcich is doing. And, you're right that at this point, he's not simply not a hot commodity on the coaching market. People aren't talking about Mike Yurcich as the next big thing. But, these are the kind of seasons and the kind of situations that he can put himself in to get the Cowboys back up to some of those top offensive rankings. So, another thing that we got to remember here as well as we talk about Yurcich and the offensive struggles, this is only going to be Mason Rudolph's fifth career start. A lot of those short passing, situations that we saw against Central Michigan where it looked really vanilla, there were situations where Rudolph was checking down a lot. He was going very quickly through his progressions. And give credit to a Central Michigan defense that maybe is a bit underrated than what we're giving them credit for. So as Rudolph continues to develop, as these guys kind of cohesively bring in this new game plan with all these new assistant coaches OSU has brought in, I think they're going to have the opportunity to take a few steps forward, and so fans can maybe grow to appreciate what Mike Yurcich is really made of.
Kyle, it's a great point. We got to keep our eye on the MAC, keep our eye on Central Michigan. It'll be interesting to see how we look at that game given 2 months down the road. Right. Is Central Michigan going to be somebody playing in big games? Might they be in a bowl? How will that reflect on the Cowboys? We may not look at last Thursday's opener as the disappointment that we sort of view it now. Kyle, Jenny, you guys got stories planned that really tie into the opening week. I'd like you to talk about that. Kyle, let's start with you. One of the big dramas, of course, on late into OSU, the home opener, is the return of The Voice. Larry Reese back from his battle for cancer, but The Voice, capital V, is back. But how about his voice? Kyle, what do you know about Larry and how he'll sound on Saturday?
Right. Talking with Larry on the phone today, his voice sounds great. It's not necessarily the same booming and sharp one that he had before going through all the radiation and the chemotherapy, but he's still got it. He's still a guy who has that deep kind of bass vocal cords that are going to ring out across a stadium, and he's excited. But at the same time, for the first time really in his life, his voice has become a bit of a weak point for him. He sees the full irony in the fact that he's the PA guy for OSU, and now he had throat cancer, and it has affected some things. So, when he's up in the booth on Saturday, he's going to have a few glasses of iced tea, some lozenges, some cough drops, some things to kind of help him along the way. But he really has no idea how he's going to perform just because this is going to be the first time that he's going to be required to talk like this for, a 4-hour span or however long the game lasts. So another interesting aside to it is obviously before the game, he's going to want to preserve that voice. But his job is to talk to people. As the deputy AD, as a guy who's in charge of a lot of fundraising initiatives and things like that, he has to be walking around talking to people in the skyboxes they have there, networking, continuing trying to get more people to invest in the program. So that's important to him. He's a guy that everyone who's going to see him on campus tomorrow is going to want to talk to him, and that's just not the best situation for him in preserving that voice. But this is a game that he's had circled on the calendar for a long time now. A lot of fans didn't look at this as the Central Arkansas as a premier game, something that they were really looking forward to other than the home opener, but not the case with Larry, just with the big delay, knowing that this was going to be his return back. It's going to be an emotional experience for him, being that he's been with this program for so long. He's an OSU grad, and it means a lot more to him than just a job. So to get back in there and to get a sense of normalcy, it's been really refreshing and big for him after everything he's been through.
Maybe Larry should play it a little bit like the Cowboys offense, starting off a little conservative.
Right, and that's what Larry said. That's kind of the problem. OSU runs up 4 or 5 touchdowns in the first half. He's gonna be feeling pretty hoarse.
Jenny, you're writing about Mason Rudolph and another side of him that has not been all that evident. We saw his story, the rumors. We've written a little bit about his trip to the Holy Land this summer, and you're telling us a story about the man behind that trip.
Yeah, obviously Mason Rudolph, as we talked before, making his first home start as the Cowboy quarterback. We thought it would be a good day to pull back another layer on Mason Rudolph's story. And yeah, we've had several mentions, and I know it's been around that he went to Israel during his downtime this last spring. But I had a chance to talk to him a little bit about that, and he revealed some more details about that trip. And he went with his grandparents. And in talking to him, found out that it was really his grandfather that has been very instrumental, in addition to parents, his other grandparents, in really growing his faith over the years. So I got a chance to talk to his granddad. His name is Jim Logan. All of the grandkids, he's got 5 of them, call him Datch. He says he doesn't actually know where the nickname came from. It's, I guess, a creation of Mason's mom, and he's not sure what it means, but that's what everybody calls him. Kind of a cowboy, if you will, living in Virginia, has a farm, has some horses, and he really was a guy from when Mason was a young age, saw his granddad, preaching and sharing his faith, and that really helped to grow in Mason. I think what we've seen as much as anything, even though we haven't seen it in Stillwater yet, but in all these other games and other interactions that have happened, you get the sense like Mason Rudolph's a guy that has a maturity and sort of a different air about him that it may be a little bit beyond his 20 years of age. And so in diving into that a little bit, it really became a story of faith, a story of a relationship with his granddad, and something that I really enjoyed writing and reporting, and I hope people enjoy it because, I think it's just another, like I said, another layer of Mason Rudolph. I think we're going to be sharing a lot of these type of stories as time goes on because it looks like he's going to be a guy that's playing quarterback in our midst for quite some time.
Thanks, Jenny. Jenny, I want you to stay around to talk to Jason. We're bringing in Jason Kersey to talk about the OU Tennessee game. Jason, where are you right now?
I am sitting in the lobby of the Courtyard Marriott Knoxville Airport. So it's not great scenery behind me, but this was the best place to do it.
And Jason, how close are you to Neyland Stadium?
We're a little ways from Neyland Stadium right now, probably 10 or 15 minutes away. The airport's kind of out of town, so we're going to head over there here in a little bit and check everything out.
Jason, the big story, of course, OU, Tennessee, ESPN, national game, really one of those exotic, eagerly anticipated games that Joe Castiglione and Bob Stoops schedule every year for the Sooners. This one on the road, and the big story has resurfaced. Again, Eric Stryker tells us that he's tired of people blowing gas up a dash of the SEC. Let me ask you this, Jason. After you wrote that story and the reaction to it, where does this rank on the bulletin board scale?
Well, I don't think that it is quite, what was it, Dominique Frank saying that Tim Tebow wouldn't be a top 5 quarterback in the Big 12, or
Orange freaking Christmas,
or Larry Burdine saying whatever it was that he said about Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush before the 2004 national championship game. But it's up there, and it's certainly riled people up here in Knoxville. I've been on a few radio stations here in Knoxville, and that's always the first question. I sat next to a Tennessee season ticket holder on my flight from Charlotte to Knoxville last night. One of the first things he said was something about Stryker needing to keep his mouth shut. So, I mean, the people here definitely are aware of it, and I think they'll probably let him hear it tomorrow.
Jenny, do you think it's at all interesting that how the SEC sensibilities are maybe offended by this? I don't know if anybody takes time to really sort of criticize the Big 12. Isn't it interesting that there's such – he didn't say anything about Tennessee. He said it about the SEC. How does this change the bulletin board level of that quote?
Well, I agree. I think that it is bulletin board material, but it's really if you actually read what he said, you're right. It's not super it's not like he's taking pot shots at Tennessee or, their talent or anything like that. He was actually speaking more about people outside the SEC and the hype that gets ginned up by national media and other people who look at the SEC as all powerful. So I think if you actually look at what he said, he's not knocking the SEC. I mean, he wasn't faulting anybody in the SEC for what they've done. He was just saying, hey, everybody else needs to chill out and actually evaluate the SEC for what they are. And that's a really good conference. But, he's got a great point in the fact that, you look at a team like Mississippi State gets ranked 25th in the latest AP poll, which, again, it doesn't count for anything, but it kind of gives you a gauge of where people are thinking. And Mississippi State is no more of a top 25 team than about 8 other teams probably should be there over them. But because they're an SEC team, I think they get the benefit of the doubt as being better than some of those other teams. So I think that's just it's almost human nature. You don't even think about it, But I think Stryker had a good point. But obviously, the way he said it, you start throwing in a dash dash, $, however you want to say it, it's going to rile people up. I think that just added another layer to it right there.
Okay, guys, I tell you whose bulletin board it belongs on. Kirk Herbstreit, College Game Day. They should be all fired up. They should be coming after Eric Stryker. Of course, they're not playing the Sooners on Saturday. The Vols are. And, Jason, what's the difference between this Vols team than the one that Butch Jones brought to Norman last year?
Well, the big noticeable difference is the quarterback. Last year their quarterback was a pocket passer who couldn't move much, and OU tends to be better against quarterbacks like that. When they play against guys who can move around, they have a lot more trouble, and Joshua Dobbs is a guy who can move around. I think that is going to affect the way OU attacks Tennessee. I think they're going to have to be a little bit more careful about rushing Eric Stryker. Attacking him from that way, because when you do that with a quarterback like a Joshua Dobbs, he's going to be able to spin out of those things and get outside the pocket a little easier. So I think that affects it. They're also a little bit more experienced than they were last year. They're playing the game at home, which is, regardless of what Bob Stoops says, it's a big deal. This is a giant stadium that a lot of these guys on OU's team have absolutely no experience playing in anything like it. And also, I come back to that guy I sat next to on the plane last night, talking to him and talking to some other people around Knoxville. This is arguably the most anticipated game in this city, in that stadium, in a decade. And the reason is these are a lot of very, very anxious fans who've been waiting a long time to be relevant again, and they feel like they're just this close. One big non-conference win over a team like Oklahoma, they feel like is going to be what finally pushes them back into the national conversation. This is going to be a very, very fired up crowd tomorrow.
Jason, that's interesting because I took some questions on our Power Lunch live chat yesterday, and I'm sure you've got some of these questions either via Twitter, email, or the chats. But I get the feeling like for actually both fan bases, this is kind of a gauge game. I think Tennessee fans are fired up about the possibility of what this Vols team could do, what they could be playing in the SEC East. I think they feel like obviously Georgia may be the team they're chasing, but if you beat Georgia, you got a great chance to get to the SEC championship game, and we all know where that could lead. On the OU side, I think there's a lot of OU fans that want to believe that with the Lincoln Riley offense, Baker Mayfield, Joe Mixon, the changes on defense, that this Sooner team is better than a lot of people are maybe saying they will be. But this is the type of game that Sooner fans want to see. They want to see how excited should I be. And if OU can go on the road and win this game, I think that ups the excitement level by OU fans. Because right now I think a lot of people are sort of, not getting as emotionally invested in this team as we've seen maybe in past years, the belief that this is a national championship caliber team. I just think people are kind of, waiting a little bit, and this could be a game where it could really change that perception. So I think for both fan bases, this is really a game that they're kind of waiting to see, how does my team play? Just how good could they potentially be?
Well, yeah, I mean, definitely, because with OU last week against Akron, the offensive line did not play well against Akron's defensive line. And Lincoln Riley said that Akron's defensive line is better than you think. And maybe that's true, but they're not Tennessee's defensive front. Tennessee's defensive front is really good. Most of their best players are are linebackers or defensive linemen. And so this game is huge for the offensive line, see how good they really are. And it's also huge for the secondary because Tennessee's passing game had a pretty big game last week against Bowling Green. And, we've heard a lot of talk for months about how much better this secondary is. We really don't know if that's true or not because Akron's offense was horrendous. So we don't know if that's actually true or not. We're going to find out if it's true tomorrow.
Guys, Jason, I heard something on the radio yesterday. It was an opinion offered that perhaps if OU wins this game, the narrative will be, well, Tennessee wasn't as good as everybody thought it might be. A team that's just sort of just getting in the top 25. And if the Sooners lose, it will be, oh my gosh, this is proof that they're not as good as we thought they'd be. The idea that the OU was in a no-win situation. Do you buy that? And have you changed your idea? If we could do your picks right now, would you change your pick?
I would not change my pick. I'd stick with Tennessee. I picked Tennessee 34-31. I'm gonna stick with that. But in terms of this being a no-win, I don't buy that at all. I think this is a huge opportunity for OU. I think if they win this game, it is a big deal. Now there may be some people who say Tennessee isn't as good as anybody thought they were or whatever. But I think just for OU's own momentum, carrying them into Big 12 play, and for, like Jenny said, the excitement around the program, I think it's huge if they win this game tomorrow.
Jenny,
well, and
go ahead.
I think too. I know I was just going to follow up. I think what Jason said a little bit ago about some of those areas that Tennessee is going to test. That to me sort of removes some of that no-win situation. Obviously, if in another 2 months we're looking in Tennessee's, 3-8 or something. Okay, well, then they're not as good. We were wrong, they were wrong. But you look at the really top-notch groups on this Tennessee team, like Jason said, that defensive front, some wide receivers and some running backs and a quarterback that can really play. The areas that OU looks like could be determining factors in their season-long success are really going to get tested on Saturday. So if it was, strength versus strength and weakness versus weakness, maybe I'd think differently. But there's a lot of strength versus weakness out there, or perceived strength and weakness, I think. So we're going to get a chance to find out. Maybe that O-line is better than we thought. Maybe the secondary is improved, or the opposite. I think a lot of that is going to flesh out on Saturday.
Jason, before I get you out of here, real quick, a couple questions. The suspension of the Vols defensive tackle, I think, is Danny O'Brien. What impact does that have on them?
Well, I mean, I think it certainly has an impact. I mean, that's one of their guys that we're going to depend on in that rotation. But I still think they have a lot of other guys that can really play. And so, I don't know that that's going to be any sort of determining factor in the game.
And give us a pitch on your story that you're writing for the Saturday editions of the Oklahoman.
Yeah, the story that I've written is kind of about how this game shows the opportunities that were sort of blown by some of the recruiting classes that came, and especially between 2011 and 2013. A lot of those guys aren't around, and those are guys. 2011 class of the 17 that signed, there are only 6 that didn't quit or get kicked off the team. Jordan Phillips went to the NFL, so that he doesn't really count. He's one of the 6. And then of the other 5, there's really only a couple that are big contributors. That'd be Frank Shannon and Nila Kasatati. The others are guys who are still here but haven't really contributed much. And you notice between those 3 classes, the areas where they really took the biggest hits are where they have the biggest problems. And that's in the secondary, on the offensive line, and at receiver. And those sorts of failures are what cost James Patton and Bruce Kittle their jobs, cost Jay Norvell his job, and they're just now able to sort of they're just now getting to a point, I think, where they can get this stuff turned around. But they're still a very young team. More than half of the depth chart, the offensive and defensive depth chart for OU, have been in Norman for less than 2 years, and that's not a place OU wants to be.
Jenny, the final word will be yours. Barry is off floating with the Vol Navy in preparation for a story in the Oklahoman on Saturday. But are the Sooners too young and too inexperienced at those key positions to win on the road against an SEC team?
Well, by the way, I was going to ask Jason if his next stop was to go fish Barry out of the Tennessee River. It sounds like that is the case. Good luck, Jason. I think that is a great point. The fact that, you really are looking at, for example, a secondary that, while Zach Sanchez is obviously proven, you're looking at a bunch of first and second year guys largely at other secondary positions. Does that become just too much for them to handle? I do have Tennessee winning. I think I've actually got the same score as Jason. I swear I did not copy off of your paper, Jason. I promise. I'm doing bad enough on my own. I think I just picked everybody to cover this week. I think I just said, you know what? I'm picking every game to cover. So
I'm gonna stop sending my picks to the whole staff because you're just stealing my picks.
But I think it's going to be a close game. I think it's going to be a really good game. I just think at home. I thought Barry had a fantastic line today in his story about Neyland Stadium. The fact that if you're looking to see sky, you got to stand on the field and look straight up. It's a huge stadium. As Jason referenced, people are fired up. To me, that'll just be the little bit of extra juice that gets Tennessee over the top in some of those key matchups. But I think it's going to be a heck of a game.
Thanks, guys. Listen. Speaking of things we can stop sending to the rest of the staff, I got another one for you, Jason. Keywords, Pomeranian DNA. Just throwing it out there. Hey, that's all for this edition of Football Fridays Hangout, but you can stay with the best coverage team every day at News OK and every morning in the Oklahoman. Have fun in Knoxville.